Hello survivors and welcome to First Aid Spray, a Resident Evil podcast by fans for fans. This is episode 42 and this time we're rolling on the encounter table, drawing from the tension deck and picking up campaign path tokens as we explore Raccoon City in Steamforged Games' Resident Evil 3 the board game. My name is Cy and joining me around the table this week, he's a resourceful podcast veteran and his accent drives all the listeners wild. Hey up, it's Fire Button Steve Valance.
Hello everybody.
A supervisor in the RE board game community and First Aid Spray Discord, his concealed supplies mostly consist of a drawer full of unpainted and unfinished miniatures. From Itchy Painty, it's Michael Burgertime Early.
It's so cold out right now.
And repositioning himself away from a last escape back into a normal, boring day job and instead digging his heels in further as the mastermind of Resident Evil board game development. From Steamforged Games, it's the lead designer of Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3 the board games, Sherwin Matthews.
Alright guys.
If you got all of those references, then good job. You've been paying attention to cards, certain particular cards. This episode of First Aid Spray, like all others, was recorded live on our Discord server. Enter our little world of survival horror now to hear the show early and unedited, as well as join our wonderful community and keep up to date with all of the latest news. You can find a link to the server, as well as all of our social media profiles at our website, faspraypod.com. You can also help the show by checking out our merch or by supporting us on Patreon for as little as $1 a month with various tiers, each with their own perks. Head over to patreon.com/FASprayPod for a full list and the chance to create bonus First Aid Spray content. So at the top, thank you to our latest Patreons. Thank you to them411 and thank you to Ferdinand van der Hark. Thank you both and thank you everyone for your continued support of First Aid Spray. It helps, keeps the light on and it drives those numbers up. Cards on the table, our social media goals were probably a little bit loftier, so we haven't actually hit any and pushed past anything recently, but we have dropped a new bonus episode nonetheless, just because we're all very, very hyped for Metroid Dread. So to celebrate the 25th anniversary of Super Metroid, we sat down and talked very highly of that game. So if you want to hear us discuss Super Metroid, that is Patreon exclusive for a little while longer before it becomes too public. As is everything we do. If you are a Tyrant level backer, you get it about a month before everyone else, including our YouTube videos, which you'll get about a week before everyone else, including our 16-minute essay that I wrote, Resident Evil The Next Generation, where I looked at what I think needs to happen in terms of the cast of Resident Evil sort of moving forward. It's very much an opinion piece. So don't get mad at me, but do check it out if you're curious about that and me sort of rambling about Sherry Birkin for about 15 minutes. We got some stuff coming up very soon as well, so keep your eyes open on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe and all that jazz. Otherwise, let's roll into some rather exciting, recently breaking Biohazard news.
So, if you're even remotely in the Resident Evil news sphere, your first bit of news should be very well known to you. The first official shots from the Resident Evil Welcome to Raccoon City have now been revealed. The new movie by Johannes Roberts. That's right. So again, it never hurts to sort of clarify what project this is because there's obviously been so much going on. This is not the Wesker Children, the Lance Reddick Netflix show. This is the live-action film that is adapted from Resident Evil 1 and Resident Evil 2, which we knew anyway, but now it's obviously very, very clear with the 3 pictures that dropped. You've got Leon and Claire, I guess, in the police basement or maybe the sewer, somewhere underground. You've got Chris, Jill, Wesker, and Richard Aiken in the foyer of the Spencer Mansion, and a rather gruesome picture of Lisa Trevor. Steve, what are your sort of first reaction to these screenshots? Honestly, okay, cool. You know, it is fine. The only thing that really stands out to me is like Lisa Trevor is already creeping me out just with the hair bleeding through one of the eye holes on her skin mask. The characters look fine to me. I know a lot of people are upset about certain costume changes and the, shall we say, quote-unquote, quality of the costumes, but I think they're okay. They look all in keeping with the aesthetics they're trying to provide. Jill looks a bit more, if Stars had a defined uniform, more on beat than the rest of them now. She used to have like the unique, you know, beret and shoulder guards, which don't quite mesh up what everyone else wears. So that's fine by me. But people will get angry because it's the internet.
Right, because you can kind of see that she and Wesker are wearing the same outfit.
Yeah, or at least they're wearing something a bit more straightforward.
Yeah, I like it. Some of these are obviously like early set photos. There's not any post production happening yet.
Yeah, yeah.
It makes me excited. I find myself wondering like how they're going to tell both stories at once. I'm interested to see how they handle that.
Right.
Is it going to take place on the same night? Do we know? Is there like any story stuff?
I think so. I mean, it's definitely been hinted at that sort of two stories are going to connect together at the end, I think. But then again, I've read so many random theories and opinions that maybe I'm misquoting that. But, if that's not been said, it is my belief, I think, that we're going to get one squad of characters going through the mansion and then another squad that's going through the Assault on Precinct 13 style RPD section, as it has been said. I mean,
so Leon and Effie Stoneham, they're going to be fine. No one messes with Effie. If you've watched Skins, you know exactly what I mean.
I'm excited. The costumes look functional too. I was just thinking that they look like clothing. They look like something you'd wear if you needed to be comfortable, but also need to be prepared. And this is kind of like they're hiking. I could see people wearing this costume.
Right. Yeah. It's functional is a good word for it for sure. I mean, it doesn't look miles and away. I don't remember what the first images, of course, from the Anderson film was, but everyone's entitled to their opinion, and I get where a lot of those opinions are coming from. But at least with this looks closer to the kind of thing that people have been asking for the longest time. This is clearly an adaptation of the games. Whether or not that works, trying to adapt two stories at once, I don't know. Sherwin, have you seen these photos? What do you make of this?
Yeah, I have. It's I think much like everybody, I'm curious of how they're going to combine two story arcs into, forgetting anything in terms of canon of time differences and that sort of stuff. I'm intrigued to see how they're going to cohesively tie those two quite large story arcs together in a way that doesn't just feel like it's just really seriously lacking in something. So I can easily see it's obviously difficult to translate meandering, pathways through a mansion or through a police station or whatever. Trying to, you can't have a movie which is exactly the same experience as walking through a mansion, because so much of it is just going to be you walking around quietly, occasionally killing a zombie, right? But at the same time, there's surely the movie would be better served to kind of zoom in on one of those instances, then make another movie which is the other part. And if you need to tie them together, maybe do that in a third movie or something. But
right.
I don't know. It's a very interesting decision. I could see, if you want me to spitball ideas, I could see kind of the mansion section being a flashback that happens at some point, and then they bump into somebody and then that sort of stuff. Who knows?
My thought I thinking along the same lines. My brain goes to the movie taking place in Raccoon City, and right away Claire finds Chris's journal, and she reads about the mansion incident where he goes into detail, and that's what these scenes are.
Sure, I could see something like that, certainly interspersed, and one is actually taking place in the past, and we got more of a focus on one. I think, personally, I completely agree. I think we should have just had Resident Evil 1, but I think with this huge success Remake 2, this was probably always going to be on the cards. That's been the big game. But as you said, Sherwin, it's difficult to know how this is going to work, because there's a lot of moving parts in those stories separately. Even in RE2, you've got to deal with, and we talked about this when we did the book club recently, you've got to give the right amount of attention to stuff like Tyrant and Birkin as well, both sort of stalking creatures and everything else and all the characters. And then on top of that, you got RE1 stuff. Are we going to get, the original Tyrant? We've got Lisa Trevor, we know that. So we have no idea what's going to get sort of cut or moved around from each story. What I do want to highlight before we move on, at least, is that, and this is just director, but if you read Johannes Roberts' sort of interview piece with IGN, which is how these photos came out, he's saying a lot of things right. For one thing, for those people who are maybe worried about the way that certain characters look, he talks about sort of less just basically trying to find an actor that looks like the character and putting them on screen and hoping that it works, so much as trying to find a character that sort of embodies the energy, an actor that embodies the energy of the character, which is most certainly the way to go. I think, for one thing, that says he understands the characters more than just from a visual point of view. You know, Leon is not just floppy-haired dude in a cop outfit. He talks in the interview about how Leon is going through this day sort of strung out and hung over, which is obviously technically part of the canon and stuff like that, and how that actor really brought that mood. So that's really good as well. And he talked a lot about sort of practical effects and stuff like that, and how to... The thing that really got me was talking about how to sort of highlight creatures. We're not going to be bouncing around from action scene to action scene. He really wants to dwell on sort of the horror of each individual creature and zombie and stuff like that. You know, he cites films like The Thing as kind of inspiration for that, and really give them the spotlight that they deserve. So you know, that's quite exciting to hear. You know, that makes me pretty interested to see this film. You know, it might be a car wreck, but so far
it could be a good-looking one, right?
Yeah, so far it might be a fun one.
I mean, they've hinted at the obviously Birkin's going to be in it, and we've seen Lisa Trevor, and a lot of people are a bit not sold on her design, but I think they've kind of seen it as that's her face looking at the camera when it's just a face that's been attached to the side of the head. I want to see what they'll do with Birkin. Genuinely, looking at Lisa in that one screenshot has got me excited to see if we see G Birkin. I want to see how they approach that.
Yeah.
But more importantly, I want to see if these incidences are going on at the same time. If in a building not too far away from the mansion there is a magical elevator with a tram to unite our characters into one final battle, and therefore make half the community lose their. Sorry.
Resident Evil needs a tram of some kind or a cable car. So yep.
It's Shed 4.
The interesting point will be whether Birkin makes it. I'm not sure if you're putting those two games together, or those two story arcs together, that something can't stay. Like, you can't have two big bads.
Right.
I don't know. You can have a T-002 Tyrant and a William Birkin and a T-103.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to get the RE1 Tyrant. You're definitely going to get Birkin in there. He's been cast. Whether or not he turns into a monster, you know, maybe that's not a thing. But if that's the case, then that's kind of weird, because you've got a Sherry in there. So it's still so much we don't know. And the film is out in something like, what are we, 2 and a bit months? Maybe just about 3 months. It's not far away now. So I think we'll get a clearer picture soon, because I think they're putting these photos out to start building the hype before a trailer is probably going to come, I would say, in 3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah. I'm here for it. I'm excited. I'm gonna watch it.
I am channeling the same level of excitement I had for the very original Resident Evil movie before we knew anything about it. As in, I'm looking forward to it as a fan and going, do you know what? This is going to be cool. I'm going to go see this movie, and I'll make up my mind watching it, but I don't care because I love Resident Evil. Yes. And that's literally it. For me, it's like basically hit a reset button and start again. And that's the way I'm looking at it.
That's I agree with that. I'm here. I feel the same way. I was so disappointed at the end of that movie.
So, how healthy are we all? Are we all feeling okay? Because just in case, Capcom are now selling green and red herbs. From I believe it's their Japanese store. They're selling actual merchandise, stationery, and stuff like that.
Yes, I do like slipping in the little stupid fluff stories these days, don't I? But nonetheless, yes, you can buy green and red herbs, or they're actually bath salts, so they're probably, I wouldn't advise ingesting them. They probably won't make you healthy if you ingest them. But the scent of herbs, apparently they are, whatever exactly that means, I don't know. Small pack, about $5 a pack, from the Japanese Capcom store. Unlikely. This is the kind of like novelty item that probably won't come worldwide. You can probably get worldwide shipping though, and somebody let us know, what does the green and red herb bath salt smell like, and does something special happen if you mix them together?
I just want to see someone buy them and then analyze them and then say, so the green and red herbs are canonically this. A way of scientifically breaking down what they are. Yeah, it feels like they saw Etsy and rolled with the stuff that people put on there, and that's not a dig.
You're right.
I think it's a real cool novelty item. I would love like a little green and red herb kind of thing. I think it's cool.
Steve buried the lead here because not only are there bath salts, Rainer, there's a perfume collection, a Resident Evil perfume collection. That's funny.
Whatever that means. Musk of Redfield.
What does Leon S. Kennedy smell like? No idea.
There are some things I don't want to know.
That's funny. I think it's neat that they do those little tchotchkes.
Yeah, no, I think it's why not? Like, there's certain sort of marketing things and tie-ins that you expect. So fair play to Capcom for always just trying new weird stuff. It gets us talking. We're talking about it right now, so it's worth a giggle. So yeah, well done to them for yet another. Okay, that's weird, but kind of cool. All right, let's move right along to the main subject of this podcast, which is Resident Evil 3, the board game. And now, reading the file Jill's Diary from Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, in character as Jill Valentine, Latina Otaku, who you can follow on Twitter at Latina Otaku.
August 7th. 2 weeks have passed since that day. My wounds have been healed, but I just can't forget it. For most people, it's history now, but for me, whenever I close my eyes, it all comes back clearly. Zombies eating people's flesh, and the screams of my teammates dying. No, the wounds in my heart are not healed yet. August 13th. Chris has been causing a lot of trouble recently. What's with him? He seldom talks to the other police members and is constantly irritated. The other day, he punched Elran of the boys' crime department just for accidentally splashing Chris's face with coffee. I immediately stopped Chris, but when he saw me, he just gave me a wink and walked away. I wonder what happened to him.
All right, it is the long-awaited episode, I would say. The board games is something that's very near and dear to us, so it's very excited to sort of cover Resident Evil 3, the board game, as it draws close to its retail release, which was recently revealed to be October 2021. But I think everyone who backed it on Kickstarter now should have all of their stuff, or very close to getting every last piece as well, all the way around the world. It was a huge success. 7,500 backers or so, pledging £865,000 to push the Kickstarter. Yeah, to a pretty huge success, following on top of Resident Evil 2, the board game, which we've talked about. As I say, the board games have been important to us because it kind of, without First Aid Spray, without the board games, First Aid Spray doesn't exist. Sherwin was on episode 1 of First Aid Spray. We all met via the board game community. So the link has been very tied there, but I'm very aware that there'll be people that are listening to this that aren't super clued up on the board game. So I invite you to sort of listen and do a Google and research for yourself if you're curious. And of course, there'll be people that are listening to this that are from the board game community that don't necessarily check out First Aid Spray content. So hello, welcome. We will be answering community questions from the Resident Evil board game Facebook community. But before we get to that, Sherwin, I feel like we have sort of touched on this story before, or last time we spoke, I think it was kind of a non-story, but how did Resident Evil 3, the board game, sort of come to be on your end? It just kind of was there one day, or how did that come to be?
See, I can talk about this in light of other things now. So
that's why it was a non-story.
Yeah, it's kind of a non-story at the time. So obviously we've spoken several times before about how we came to do Resident Evil 2, and in the aftermath of the Resident Evil 2 campaign, we knew that we were making another Resident Evil because we had so much fun making it. Because I probably would have fought tooth and nail to make sure we made another one anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think Steamforge, everybody at Steamforge, we all love super fun projects and everything else, and this was something where Lox and Matt especially both were very excited about making another Resident Evil game, so it was always a given. What we didn't know is whether we were going to make Resident Evil, or just Resident Evil. I was about to say Resident Evil 1, but it's not Resident Evil 1, is it? It's Resident Evil, or Resident Evil 3. And so I started developing both at the same time, simultaneously, which was a bit of a headache.
I can imagine.
And then at some point, we course corrected onto Resident Evil 3. And the biggest reason for that was that we basically had an idea that, well, there's a remake of Resident Evil 3 coming.
Right.
Capcom told us about this. And at this point, it kind of seemed like a logical one to do because everyone was talking about it. And it was something where, okay, we can definitely we can easily fit this in. And it was a case of looking at a lot of the mechanics I'd come up with for RE1. I'm just going to call it RE1 because it's easier. So we're coming up with RE1 and then RE3 and working out which ones would best sort of suit this particular engine and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, in terms of introducing micro adjustments to the survival horror engine of RE2 to kind of improve the experience or smooth the edges and also introduce new gameplay. Because one thing I didn't want to do is suddenly drop a whole bunch of new stuff on it and then overcomplicate the experience. And yeah, that's really the story of how we came to do it. It's as simple as at some point there was a clutch conversation of we can't keep going on developing both at the same time. Which one do we want to focus on? And it was the remake that tipped it over the edge.
That makes sense. That makes complete sense.
Yeah.
And to that end, I think, most people are aware of what's next. If you backed the Kickstarter, most people received a little flyer to tell you what's coming next. So I'm going to assume that obviously the success of RE3 has been enough to warrant continue going further, and there's been sort of good feelings at Steamforge and with Capcom as well. What's it like at Steamforge headquarters now that this is all fulfilled? Everyone very happy with the finished product?
Super happy. I mean, there's some amazing stuff happening in terms of the community reaction to RE3. Simply amazing. Like I go onto the Board Game Geek site or whatever, and the score is going up, which is always encouraging.
Mm-hmm.
And there's kind of a couple of teething problems the game has had for whatever reason, which maybe we'll get onto. But the point is that overall the experience seems to have so captured everything that we wanted it to, and everything the community expects from a Resident Evil game, and also now starts to understand what the tabletop entities are as more of an actual property as well.
Right.
It's really something where the game seems to be smashing it out of the park with everybody, which is of immense relief. Like I cannot even begin to describe. But at the same time, it's something where, it's just really, like, I think everybody involved in the project. The nicest thing about working on any game is the point where, and I can only talk about this from a design development perspective, and graphic design to a lesser extent, but is when you actually get a physical copy of the game and you take the lid off and you actually start to look at this thing that you've created, and it's no longer these kind of bits of paper that you've put in a sleeve with a magic card in there to sort of hide the back of it or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and a bunch of proxy models from whatever game you were playing most recently. And you actually got dice where you haven't kind of just scribbled on them or whatever else. When you actually physically start having something, that's when it becomes really, really exciting, really interesting. There was a thing of, I remember lots ages and ages ago now when the first production copies of RE2 came in, and I remember being like a child in a candy store when I opened up the box. I think Lox took a picture of it and put it in the Facebook group of me just opening the first ever copy of Resident Evil 2 and grinning like an idiot. It's amazing.
Excellent.
Basically.
Yeah, I can imagine. And you've sort of set us up nicely to sort of talk about our own sort of reactions to it. We'll circle back around to the Q&A, but I just wanted to sort of, let the three of us sort of talk about our reaction to sort of our deliveries and our expectation, because, eagle-eyed people who've got the game will be aware that all three of us play tested it in some form. So we've been aware of this for a long time, and we've had a similar thing as well, playing with, as you said, proxy models and stuff, but actually getting the game, coming from people who started off as simply fans of the RE2 board game and the campaign and the community, getting this sort of like a brand new lease on life. The community was doing well, but to have a whole new game to dive into, and one that's, I don't quite know how to quantify just how much it's blown everything up several levels. Like, it builds so much on everything from RE2. So, Berger, what's your sort of general overview of the gameplay of RE3, sort of how it improves on RE2? What's the standout favorite things for you? What are your experiences like?
I have been literally bouncing my chair because I want to talk about how much I love this game. I have so much fun every time I get to play it. I really enjoyed Resident Evil 2. And one of my favorite convention memories was teaching people how to play Resident Evil 2 at Gen Con, just because A, it's such an easy game to play to begin with. And B, people who play it are interested in dungeon crawling games, and on its face, it's one of the best. And then people who are playing this and they're like, I played this level before, talking back to their experience with the video game. And we were talking about this before the show, but just to encapsulate how much fun this game was, is I had a couple friends over on Saturday, and they're like, one of them's a big Resident Evil video game fan, never played the board game. The other one's a big board game fan, never played the video game.
Awesome.
And we dialed in. They were able to pick up the rules really quick. We're all games people, so we were able to just pick it up, and everybody figured it out. And it's a table where you're enraptured at it the whole time, because there's always something happening that you want to see. So it's to the point where it's like I'm finishing up my turn. My buddy Drew is reaching in, ready to go.
Right.
And epic moments happen where Jill gets her final escape, or not the dodge move that she has.
Mm-hmm.
Every time he's there's that move felt really satisfying to get. Mikhail being able to take a sock to the dome from the Nemesis and he takes 1 damage. It's exciting.
Yeah.
I love the new character abilities in comparison to an upgrade to Resident Evil 2. I like the aesthetic of the new dice. I think that was a solid improvement. One of the things I've always loved and appreciated about Steamforged is I feel like they've always been really great at receiving community feedback in terms of models and stuff. So I opened the models and was very impressed. And this is going back to just my experience with Guild Ball as well. I would buy the first plastic set, and they were nice. I liked them. I still have them. I painted them. But then the second wave came out, and they were much tighter.
Right.
And then this is just another step. These minis look great. Absolutely love them.
I had a similar sort of thing where I really liked the Resident Evil 2 miniatures. I painted my entire set, had a great time with them. But then you get sort of another game from the same company. You crack it open and you already see the sort of steps they've taken in later releases, and you think, oh, awesome, this is going to reflect Resident Evil 3 in this case, which I knew was coming later. So I'm looking at my Horizon miniatures being this is excellent. The bases are really nice and thick. The plastic's a bit sturdier. The card quality is nicer. And again, all of that feeds into RE3. So it just gets better every time for sure.
I'll admit that I'm struggling a little bit with the game trays. I'm totally willing to accept that I'm not using it right. But I did notice that there's some card collapse when I put it on my shelf. But that's literally the only thing that's bad about it. The only thing I don't is the fact that sometimes my cards fall out of the slot. So fantastic experience, love it. I could not say more nice things. I could actually.
We'll get a chance, definitely. I really like the game trays. It's nice having everything in near enough everything in one box. It's worked out quite well for me. I know, different people have had different experiences. From a gameplay perspective, the stuff that really stands out to me. So one of the things I love most about Resident Evil 2 is a super nerd for that game, especially was you could set up any scenario with whatever tiles you wanted, and I could look at it and tell you where it was in the game, because I knew, I know the layout of RE2's maps. I know what every room of every single map is, looking at it laid out in tile form. I thought that was really cool. Resident Evil 3 doesn't really have that because it's not quite as well suited to that. It's not quite as backtracky. It's not really set in just a couple of locations. It's constantly moving. So it's not important for it to be like that. But what that means is that all of these locations are expansions on place of the game. The press office is much bigger and much more interesting. You got extra parts of the city streets, all with their own sort of rules and gimmicks to them. So one is really focused on having dogs. One's got the brain suckers that replace the drain demos if you've got the last escape box. Sort of the emphasis on the grave digger and stuff like that. The RPD has one of my favorite scenarios in the whole game, by the way, RPD 2.
Really?
Where you're going around fixing the windows, which is a really cool idea. Stuff like getting to the one that I love is getting to the clock tower, and actually this time you have to get in rather than the video game where you just crash in. Now you have to go and find the key that's in sort of like this little shack, and that makes me think I don't want to be I don't want to be that person. Usually I'm the person that makes fun of these people. Where they're like, I want this from the remake, blah, 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 blah. It's like, if you want the remake to have more content, play the board game. Because this is what the remake...
Yep,
this is
absolutely.
this is the remake.
Yes.
This is the real remake. Expanding on everything in the right ways. So, yeah, I just... the scenarios are fantastic, and obviously that is
campaign is so fun. Like,
right.
I failed my campaign, I'm not mad.
Yeah, same. I played it. I haven't had a chance to play with a group yet, unfortunately. We played a couple of scenarios, but we haven't gone much further. That's just life. But I just had a lot of fun playing it by myself. It's so easy just to keep playing scenarios because of the campaign map that keeps track of where you are and where you want to go and all these choices. And I got as far as the city park, and I died, and I was okay with it. You know, I was like, cool. Yeah. You know what? That means I can reset, try some new characters, see what happens differently.
What else is different next time. Yeah.
Right, but... You know, RE2, the board game, had a lot of randomness to it, and RE3 does too, in the right way, where it's like, oh, I'm excited to play again because something completely different could happen. I could find this here, I could pull... I mean, the other favorite thing, I might as well just put it in there now because we're talking about it. My other favorite addition is the narrative deck, where you just step on a certain place and something could happen. You could find a survivor to carry, you could encounter a nemesis with a rocket launcher, and that's obviously different every time you play, which is, I'm really excited to see how that deck changes things, because I did make a whole lot of, I didn't save a whole lot of people in my first run. I really struggled. I was down to Jill and Dario as my saviors right at the end, and they didn't save me, so hopefully in my next playthrough I'll have some luck and maybe get to save some extra characters. Steve, what are your thoughts on the sort of expanded version of the gameplay in RE3? What's getting you the most excited? What's your experience been like?
So to dial it back to like the RE2 board game, my favorite expansion for that was the survival horror expansion, and in that one that added lots of extra rules and things you could basically unlock, like extra characters to play with and ways to affect and change the game as you play. The fact that that is in such a macro level, it's like baked heavily into the nature of RE3's makeup. Yeah. I love that. Like, the fact that there is consequences to every action. Like any scenario has multiple, well, not everyone, but a lot of them have multiple outcomes, and they obviously have the narrative deck.
True.
And things can very much affect how the game's going to play. Even failure isn't quite as, I'd say, as brutal, at least at first, in the RE3 game, because you can just have a do-over and up the city of ruin crisis level, which potentially gives you a lot of wiggle room if you know what you're doing. If you're not, you're going to still get battered. But that fundamentally changes how the game is played, because it's not just you could play RE2 as a campaign, like going scenario over and over with your friends. But it wasn't really. I didn't feel like it was designed that way. It was designed more to be a bit more little and often, playing this piece and then this piece and then this piece. 3, it's a continuity. It's your story. It's your legacy, and I love that. I love the fact that this is basically Resident Evil's D&D. Obviously the mechanics are tailored to Steamforge's makeup with the whole dodge rolling, landing the hits, but the macro level is what really bleeds into me and makes me so excited every time I want to get the game. Unfortunately, it also has the drawback of trying to get enough people together to play it like a D&D game, so I'm playing it by myself. But that's a Steve problem. I love the fact that there's so much scope to it.
Yeah.
Because if you could potentially rescue a survivor, or you could potentially fight Nemesis, or you could potentially run away, and all these other little things, and it all adds up to how things are going to play out. And I believe there's so many different narrative ending cards you could potentially get from how you do it, and who survives.
So
I'm pretty.
I'm gonna have a hot take about the Resident Evil 3 board game. It does the Resident Evil 3's campaign reminds me a whole lot of the campaign system from a game called Kingdom Death Monster. If you've not heard of it, it's an absolutely ostentatiously expensive board game that's admittedly fun to play, but it's really cost prohibitive. I think the campaign system from Resident Evil 3 does it better. That's my hot take. That's my hot board game take.
Resident Evil 3's board game nerds out there, I expect are going, oh, I'm getting something like that.
Well, as a Resident Evil nerd who has a penchant for playing a few board games, Another thing I really like is the non-linearity of it. I mean, obviously the main thrust is to get the parts, but more, to get the tram working to get to the clock tower and then escape. But the fact that you can do certain things in certain scenarios to affect other ones and affect your route and how you do it is fantastic. I mean, that's technically part of the original RE3 as well. But it's nice having the option in the game itself. Like, right, okay, I've done this, so I can now do Commercial 2, or I can do RPD 1, and it's cool. I'm a very easy to please person though, so unfortunately my nuances are it's really good and the models look neat and they actually really do look fantastic. I don't think we can all undersell. Like they look like they're meant to be. I think Jill has almost all of her costumes. Sans one that we can't have because Dino Crisis is apparently a dead thing to Capcom. Sadness.
Rip.
I mean, dinosaurs just aren't cool anymore.
Yeah.
Okay, let's not get into that one. Sorry, go Burger. Go first.
I want to comment on talking about the campaign structure. I do want to comment on the items, this campaign item deck. I love it. I love how it kind of just lets you travel the game, and sometimes you get the lighter as your C item deck. Other times you get something else. It's almost always good, and I find that it doesn't make me mad to restart the game, right? Because I'm a fan. I think we're
I think what's cool about it is all the variation kind of produces all these different stories and stuff, and it's kind of what Sherwin was saying about the reaction and how it just keeps going up and up and up. And what I love is just reading other people's experiences and stuff. We had a guy not too long ago who, by the unfortunate nature of the C deck, he left the Magnum was the last card for him to pick up, but he couldn't go and get it. He couldn't physically go and get it, so he had to proceed without the Magnum, which is a very, very rare chance of that happening. But it's a situation, and one for me, the first time I drew a go and save this person card, I was in the middle of the RPD. I got whisked away into sort of like the burning room with Nemesis, and Tyrell was in there waiting for me, and I was like, sorry, I didn't anticipate this. I don't have any supplies, so I just had to let him die. There was nothing I could do. It's just stuff like that, and as Steve said, you get those choices where it's like, you can fight Nemesis, or you can raise the city danger level, which then impacts how deadly the tension deck cards can potentially be and stuff like that.
Which sounds like an easy sell, doesn't it? You think, right, okay, I'll fight Nemesis, but then he can wreck you.
Yeah.
Like, completely, and then the next time it's like, oh well, I'll leave Nemesis, and then you've turned zombies into chimeras or not chimeras, drain demons. Because the way that it's like, is it 3 tiers? I want to say it's 3 tiers, right? And the worse it gets, the worse it gets. Like the monsters, it's a big trade off. It's fantastic.
Nemesis himself, just like if you go, I'm not going to fight him this time. He's going to be way harder next time then. Like, when he gets into that second sort of bracket of the 3, his health jumps up and all this. It's like, oh, okay, this is actually getting way worse. And just the order of doing scenarios as well. Obviously, this time around, as opposed to RE2, we're really just gushing now. Instead of each scenario having its own set sort of items that are in that scenario and its set tension deck, both of those evolve over time with this.
That's so cool.
And the tension deck, if you go to this scenario, put these cards in the tension deck and they stay there, and then they affect later scenarios potentially. So you've got cards where it's like, if I go and defeat the Gravedigger, I can take these cards out now, or oops, I shouldn't have gone there now because now I've got the Drain Demo spawning card that's going to follow me through most of my campaign because I went there too early, and so on and so forth. So again, it's just like, it's just those things where it's like your decisions completely tailors the entire rest of the experience.
Absolutely. Talking about the tension cards and the improvements to them, how monster special attacks. Wow.
Yeah, so good.
Whew. Terrifying.
Not a super fan of some of this, like the Brain Sucker special move from getting a bin. I hate it. 3 damage, poison, and assault, I think. Like, oh man.
I quit. I'm done. I'm out.
So good.
Absolutely love them. just so it adds that was one of those layers that it added to the game that like a slight level of complexity that just like really kind of brought the experience together as a whole. Our remake 2 TBG when?
There's a question that's kind of like that, actually, so we'll get to that. Before we oh, sorry, go on, Steve.
I just want to say it's a shout out to the way they've wrote the rules for these monsters and things. Because when you think about it, the actually in game, okay, the difference between a drain demos and a brain sucker is that one can spit poison and one can't. Whereas there is a definitive threat level increase when you go to the brain sucker in comparison now. I mean, it's the same with Nemesis, though, because if you have a squad of 4 people and weapons, tier 1, nine times out of 10, it's almost like that one bit in the first RoboCop film where they're shooting, Alex Murphy apart. Alex Murphy, sorry. But when you get to, like, tier 2 and then tier 3, all of a sudden the table has turned and now he's kicking you. Well, words I can't say on a podcast.
Teeth down your throat.
Yeah.
Oh, I should have bad word earlier.
I'm really excited to play this with people, but I mean, it was just such a joy. Just like because it's a completely cooperative game, there is no problem playing this by yourself at all. As we've all pointed out, got through most of a complete. Well, I did get through the core box and some of the City of Ruin expansion just by myself and just had a great time. But yeah, I'm excited to sort of share that experience now with people. And my painted models, of course, as well. Which brings me to design. Before we get to the Q&A, just have a quick waffle. What do we think of the way that it looks? Obviously, as I said, it's just a case of being a later game. We've got all these improvements. The card stock is better. The miniature quality is better. The artwork's fantastically gruesome. And, of course, the big one, as you said, Steamforged, listening to fans, the tiles in this game are just chef's kiss, magnifique. I love them. I just could stare at them forever. The city street stuff with the cop cars strewn around, just love them.
I have replaced all my Resident Evil 2 tiles.
Yeah, that's pretty fair, to be fair. I get that completely. I mean, there was nothing particularly wrong for me with the RE2 ones, but I know which ones I'm going to be dipping into.
They're just better. Yeah. You're just not going to use the old ones anymore. And I think that's okay. I played a lot of it, and they were looking like they were feeling a little worn anyway. So it's like with this one coming out, and then with Remake coming out, every 2 years, Steamforged is just going to refresh my Resident Evil tiles for me.
Steve, any thoughts on design?
Honestly, pretty consistent. The fact that they mesh up pretty well with RE2 is obviously a fantastic thing, including the touched-up tiles. I'd imagine if you are homebrew enough, you could build some kind of labyrinthine, complex version of Raccoon City if you have enough tiles. It's pretty good. I'm a big fan of the models. Like I've already stated, that their likenesses are so strong. It's impressive. The only thing, if they had that level of less smoothness and more jaggy, so they could be a bit more PS1 modelly, I think I'd be at home. Otherwise, I have no complaints. There is one, I don't know, I think people have already talked about it. My main gripe with the RE3 board game, aesthetically, is simply the fact that the City of Ruin board, I feel like it could be a bit thicker.
That's
without touching nerves. I don't want to touch nerves, but
I'll actually just jump back into the room now. So first thing, as after the post-gush moment, is you guys all liked it then? That's cool.
Yeah, it's all right.
Kind of okay.
And the second one is, I take that on board. That, as we've mentioned a couple of times during this episode, like we're not deaf to the voices of people who kind of want to, raise bits and pieces and talk about their experiences and so on. And that's definitely a conversation we've had. So, I mean, there's not much to add to that beyond to sort of stress. I can appreciate why people who, perhaps disappointed with that component, and I can appreciate in the same way that I could appreciate people saying about the dark tiles. Certainly, there's no element of kind of denying something where people are unhappy with it, because ultimately, it's not a case of being wrong or right or someone touching nerves or whatever else. If that's someone's opinion, they're completely valid to it, and if that's where they're coming from, there's no way we should try and invalidate that by going, you just need to take better care of your stuff or whatever else. That's a perfectly valid piece of feedback that we're not deaf to, that we've listened to. So,
all right.
Mechanically, it's fantastic. I cannot gush enough about the whole concept of the City of Ruin board and how it all works out.
Absolutely love it. It's so cool.
August 15th, midnight. Chris, who's been on leave of absence for a vacation, called me, so I visited his apartment, and as soon as I walked into his room, he showed me a couple of pieces of paper. They were part of a virus research report entitled as simply as G. Then Chris told me that the nightmare still continues. He went on to say that it's not over yet, and ever since that day, he's been fighting all by himself, without rest, without even telling me. August 24th. Chris left the town today to go to Europe. Barry told me that he would send his family to Canada, and then he would follow Chris. I decided to remain in Raccoon City for a while, because I know that the research facility in this city will be very important to the entire case. In a month or so, I'll be joining with them somewhere in Europe. That's when my real battle begins.
Right, let's do the Q&A then. Let's roll into a bunch of questions from the community. Thank you to everyone who asked questions. I've taken what we can, and we will give you a shout out as we go through these. So I'll start off with a question from Mike Booth, who asked Sherwin, what did you learn from Resident Evil 2, the board game, that helped shape Resident Evil 3, the board game, the most?
So I guess the logical, I mean, we've talked a lot about the small interactions and the bits and pieces we've kind of upgraded and so on. And I won't necessarily touch too much on kind of the design in terms of the like artwork decisions and stuff like that. Because there's lots of little bits and pieces. Like, for example, something that you talked about earlier, Michael, was about the talked about with the bullets, not the bullets, the dice and kind of the gunshots. For example, I noticed that there were a whole bunch of people saying, right, so if I've rolled 2 single hits, I can combine them to a double hit, right? And I'm thinking, yeah, that's obviously not the way that works, but I can 100% see why that is, because it's the same thing. So straight away, we kind of went, right, so we need a new double hit symbol. Because that way, as soon as you change that symbol to, like, you know, a bullet or whatever else you want to do, it completely, it takes that away.
Absolutely.
And makes it much cleaner. I think the biggest thing that influenced a lot of, if I'm looking for the single biggest thing, were 2. First one is a survey I put out, a questionnaire on in the Facebook group, a little while after RE2 had come out, a few months, and I kind of said to everybody, how do you play RE2 the board game? You know, do you play standalone mode, do you play campaign, or do you play a mixture of both? And the answers I got back on that were staggering, because when Matt and I first sat down to start designing RE2, we kind of had in our heads, okay, so this is a game where it's going to be like a 90-minute experience. You have like a single tile in the middle, and then you basically have some tiles you put around the edges, and enemies move in and start attacking stuff. And that's Matt's original vision for it, and even had a DM. And then I kind of started looking at that and going, no, I think it needs to build out into a different idea. I think it needs to have lots of different tiles that go down, and it builds out. And I even got like an old pictures of somewhere of an old tile, in fact, I cut up, which is basically I built the entire police station in tiles, and went, right, so this is what this could look like. How long does it take to play? Which, by the way, is about 3 hours. And at that point, obviously, started breaking it down a bit. But one of the biggest things that we worked out is we still kind of focused on that. Well, we think people are going to play this, as Steve says, little and often. We think people are going to play like a game here, a game there, or whatever else, and we just want to give them different snapshots of where you are in the game. So then when I put out the questionnaire, because I noticed a lot of people were talking about campaign mode, because we didn't want to preclude that either. So that's a mode in there. And said, so how do people play it? And like the results were staggering. Like literally, I think something crazy like 4% of people play RE2 as a standalone experience. Like literally 4%. And of the remaining people, I think it was something like 6-7% of people play it as a combination of the two, because sometimes they do demos for people, which they count as standalone. So when you're looking at it, so basically 89% of the people out there play this game as a campaign. Yeah, okay, well then RE3 needs to focus a lot more on the campaign. And as soon as that happened, it unlocks so much cool stuff that we can start thinking about and start doing. It's the honest thing. I looked at it and went, right, well suddenly that means, how about we make it so the attention deck evolves? How about we make it so that you can explore around and you do different bits and pieces? How about we make it so that you need to find items in one scenario and take them to others or whatever else. How about we make it so that you can fail a scenario and that doesn't mean game over for the whole campaign. Lots of different ideas like that. How are we going to carry over items between stuff and balance the game built around there? Loads of different stuff suddenly just got unlocked in a massive way, and that's honestly the biggest thing. The other one is, in terms of more direct learning, was the enemy special attacks. Again, we touched on it earlier. One of the things that I think RE2 doesn't do very well is the enemy special attacks. They're only unlocked via the Vigor Mortis card, and it was something where they kind of come into effect. Every so often a zombie will do a suicide lunge, or the liquor will do like the diving slash where it sort of does a whole bunch of damage to you or whatever. But it's too conditional. So for a start, you need to draw the card. Secondly, then there needs to be one of these enemies that actually has a special attack in the same tile as you. And thirdly, it needs to be in range to actually do the special attack. And combination of those three things basically meant special attacks just were seldom used. And it wasn't until I was kind of trying to think of a better way to emulate that. And weirdly enough, Hunters is what made me think about it, because I was thinking about the RE1 Hunters in terms of what can they do? Well, they have a slash, they have a jump at you and lunge at you and kind of pin you down and kill you if you haven't got a defense item. And then they've got like the sort of, the decapitation swipe. And I'm thinking, how do I build this thing so I don't want to have a behavior deck for all of our enemies, because that would suck if every time you have a whole bunch of behavior decks. I want to have something which feels quick to reference, but gives these enemies a different way of moving around and attacking and doing stuff than simply they just have a range 1 attack that does 1 damage every time. And that's when I kind of landed on an idea of making a system where we have, as you guys know, where you have like, obviously the different entries for what's the tension deck card. What does that show? That's introducing the randomness to it. The players can kind of predict and work around. And at that point we can kind of build around. That's how you build in different actions for these enemies in a relatively straightforward way. And I think that's probably the biggest thing I learned, was trying to level up enemy behavior because it wasn't quite right for RE2.
So our next question comes from Gareth Hughes. And they ask, which game element did you find hardest to design and balance while creating Resident Evil 3?
Nemesis is a bit of a doozy.
I
Build such an iconically massive character. How do you build Nemesis into a game in a way that doesn't completely break it? As in, Nemesis turns up and is so invincible that that basically just destroys the entire thing and takes all the suspension out, because as soon as Nemesis is there, you are basically going to get killed. How do we build this thing around and try to kind of balance Nemesis in the way that it's appealing? Hey, we could go kill Nemesis. Like, we could actually go and defeat Nemesis here. We've got a chance to do it. You almost want to have something where at any given stage it's tantalizingly close to, oh, we could do this. Are we sure that's the right idea? And like, you can almost see players sitting around the table kind of working their head, I could do this actually. I feel kind of ballsy. I feel like I can kind of go for this. And that's where you know you've got it right. Because a lot of the early designs of Nemesis is, oh, Nemesis is here, just run away. Or, hey, Nemesis is here, complete walkover. Because the other thing you're building is the fact that you could encounter Nemesis at any given time randomly, because it's a narrative card, or because you're doing the scenarios in your own order. You could, if you wanted to, leave the very first part where you encounter Nemesis right until the end of the game. If you're lucky to draw the right lock cards and so on, you can actually skip like the sort of early scenario. You can leave one of them till very, very late on, and then breeze through it, because obviously you've got much better weaponry now, or at least have a much easier ride, because you're not suddenly kind of, there's less enemies there, and you're kind of nowhere near so poorly equipped as what you could start off with. It's a nice short scenario for you to heal up or whatever. So that was probably the most difficult thing, I think, to challenge. That, or trying to find how to make the sliding worms work. Because those are enemies which really don't...
That's like the reverse reason.
Yeah, they don't really have much in the game, and it's trying to make them feel distinctive.
Our next question is not from anybody.
I think it might be from me.
Oh, Sai is from Sai from First Aid Spray asked the following question. Do you want to read your question?
No,
Sai?
you go for it.
Did you struggle at all with making any of the characters feel appropriate to their video game counterparts, especially since Murphy and Tyrell Murphy, Tyrell, and Dario, etc. get so little screen time.
Do you know, I love making characters for RE because I know enough. I'm fortunate enough to know enough about the game and enough about the backstory of it and everything else that I can really leverage that knowledge into the game, into the characters. And like, here's a bit of an insider thing. When we first were working on RE2, we weren't sure of the scope of what we wanted to achieve with it, and we weren't sure we were going to get to make another RE game afterwards. So one of the things I immediately, in a slightly fanboyish but very pragmatic way, set down and went, right, so we need stretch goals and stuff. Cool, let's design all of the Stars characters. Let's design all of the UBCS characters.
Yeah.
Let's design Dario. Let's do Marvin. Let's do everybody. Because that way I've got this huge pool of characters. And if we suddenly need to pivot and throw these characters in as a stretch goal or whatever else, then we got them.
Yeah.
And as a result, kind of, there's a whole bank of different character abilities that I kind of had to pull from when looking at RE3 characters. Like, hey, cool. Stars guys, didn't look at you yet. What can we yoik over from here and put into, like, some of these other characters if I don't feel like Carlos, for example, really fits in, or don't feel like Murphy did, or whatever else. However, the most complicated, most challenging character to ever work and design in all of RE history, for board game history, is Jill Valentine. Because how do you make Jill Valentine feel particularly different to everybody else unless, well, outside of giving her inventory size 8? That's without a doubt, it's like a really key, crucial character that everyone loves, quite rightly, and really wants to play and thinks is amazing. How do you make Jill feel super special but not overpowered? And how do you make Jill feel... Sorry?
Oh, sorry, go ahead. Sure.
I was going to say, how do you make Jill feel really characterful? Because what you're really running with is, it's much like Chris, kind of a character that you put a lot of yourself into. And I'm running around doing this and I'm doing that and I'm making decisions and so on. Like, Jill, you have a Master of Unlocking thing, but ultimately that comes down to Jill has a lockpick. So it's really thinking about some of that stuff. And especially because Jill's had kind of, quite a lot of different story developments, that story arc stuff, which is quite often contradictory or kind of goes off in random directions and stuff. So it's really trying to pull what is the key identities of this character in, and that's not always clear with Jill.
Yeah.
So, long-time fan Brian Sharkey asks, but the improvements of RE3 over RE2, the improvements of RE3 over RE2 are just awesome, such as the handling of universal weapons, an evolving tension deck, enemy attacks linked to the tension cards, character reserve pool, countless other tweaks that focus on a cohesive campaign experience, a major call out to the fantastic tile artwork as well. Would you ever want to revisit RE2 with a second edition that would bring many of these improvements to that game?
100%. I'd love to go revisit RE2 and put some bits and pieces in. Whether I will or not is an interesting question. I mean, I could see an RE2 upgrade pack. I could see an RE, like a flat-out second edition of RE2. I mean, but these are all very hypothetical. There's other stuff that I'm working on at the moment which kind of goes with that. And as we've said, like, RE2 is not a game that needs any of this stuff per se. It's more so much these would just be very much things which we could introduce and make a new version of, and kind of, and really push it to the next level. But at the same time, that there's other games that are kind of we're working on, or I'm working on, that kind of have a lot of that stuff built in. So it's a case of finding the bandwidth and the desire for it.
Cool. Anonymous are asking, which characters or enemies have had the biggest changes during development?
Really good question. Sliding Worms went through several changes. Several changes. I mean, we're working to the assumption this is not so much which enemies, for example, were in RE2 and then went into RE3 and changed as we went through, but I think Sliding Worms took a bit of time to kind of get right. Weirdly, dogs, the special ability for the dogs did, but only in trying to find the right wording for what they could actually do, in terms of how their special rule worked. Otherwise, I think the big shout, the obvious shout out character wise, has got to be uh, probably Nikolai to a certain extent. Nikolai and Mikhail, both of whom I actually changed post Kickstarter, because Nikolai just didn't feel quite sinister enough, and wanted it to be a character where there's obvious bits where you play as Nikolai, and it's like, even though I'm technically a good guy right now, like I'm not really a good guy. Like I'm kind of doing my own thing, and you just happen to be there with me. So that's kind of a sense. But I, at the same time, wanted to do that in a way that was beneficial for the party. Like no one wants to play that that evil character that is running around and just has really douchebaggy abilities. It wants to be something where you can do this and it makes life better, but it also makes things a little bit worse. So that. And Mikhail, who simply put, and I feel kind of harsh to the character for it, but felt a bit underwhelming. If you guys who had played the original demo that we had on for RE3, Mikhail kind of how he was playing really was like the worst choice of the original four.
Yeah.
And one of the things I wanted to address post Resident Evil 3 Kickstarter, first thing was fire, which was more lethal than anything else in the game. And then secondly was something where I was like, okay, well, Mikhail needs a boost and fire is too powerful, so how about Mikhail can put those two things together to fix that element, and also kind of get rid of that slightly odd conditional we had where he made him better if he's really near death, but you don't ever want to be near death, so
Right.
it's kind of counterproductive.
To follow up on that, which changes from Resident Evil 2 to Resident Evil 3 were you most proud of?
I mean, bear in mind, there's a whole bunch of it is new, so I don't think that's necessarily a change as such. But I'm very proud of the special attack system. I think that really worked in a nice way that kind of pulled together all the different enemies, and sort of made them feel, a step beyond what they should be before they were before.
Yeah, it does sort of, in a weird way, tie them into the gameplay further because they are attached to stuff like the tension deck now and how that reacts. So it does, ties everything nicely. Maxime Bouchard says, this is a great adaptation. Did you feel that sometimes being true to the source material was a hindrance to the board game gameplay?
Never once. I mean, RE3 is... There's so many parts of RE... You kind of hinted on this earlier on. There's so many parts of RE3 where it's around the next corner that you don't quite see in the video game that we could really lean into for the board game. The biggest thing, for example, and it's unfortunate actually, this is something where it's slightly unfortunate in the sense that Capcom, for reasons I don't actually really truly properly understand, we kind of wanted to explore the different floors of the hospital, because you can kind of, if you think about the RE3 board game, you kind of go, okay, I'm on ground floor, and then I go straight up to third floor, or I go to basement 3 or whatever else. We wanted to explore some of the other bits and pieces, and kind of build them more like more of a series of wards and other bits and pieces like that. But we kind of, Capcom for whatever reason said we'd like you to kind of limit that down quite a lot more. So I have no idea there, but that's the only one. Like we had lots of capacity to kind of explore different bits and pieces, and really do with different ideas and stuff, which was always fun. If there is one thing that I was a little bit limited about, and this won't be anything as a big surprise to anybody, it was a shame we couldn't get beginning of the end. It's a real shame beginning of the end couldn't quite be, because that, as much as it was obviously my baby that I was talking about very much, felt like a really powerful piece of fan service that I think everyone would have definitely enjoyed. And it's a shame that we couldn't quite get that to work.
Like I'll admit I've thought about the potential mechanics of a mission like that more than once, and I too am sad for what could have been.
So I want to point out specifically, for one thing, beginning of the end, for those of you who don't know, Sherwin, do you just want to quickly sum up what that idea was?
Yeah, sure. So beginning of the end was an expansion which I threw together in the very early days of thinking about RE3. And it would have been a bit like, the best way of describing it is a bit like a RE 1.5 for RE3. And basically, you would have played as the UBTS mercenaries when they first land in the city, and kind of done a couple of different scenarios that you kind of run around and explore. at at the start of the outbreak, and at the same time also play as a bunch of kind of named RPD officers in the RPD building during the siege. And the way you unlock these scenarios is you find notes as you explore the actual game, which are like flashbacks. They take you back to that particular thing. The next scenario you play is a flashback scenario, and depending on how well you do, you may now introduce new cards into the thing. Like, let's say, for example, like, you do really, really well in the siege, in one of the RPD sieges. Well, that means if you're in the RPD next time you go there, there'll be less zombies and there'll be barricades up or something or other, or you'll find ammo stashes somewhere. If you do really badly, there's a lot more zombies out there, and you could even potentially meet one of those characters that's been eaten and is obviously there. And if you're, the UBCS, then potentially there's areas where there's barely any zombies because they've killed them all, or vice versa. So it was something where we could use that to sort of really go back, and it would have been a very nice thing to kind of explore some of the notes, some of the stuff that's introduced in RE3 in terms of, you kind of find mercenary diaries, or you find kind of, David Ford's notes and stuff like that. And those things kind of really tying them together to make it feel like this is a living, breathing thing that kind of nods off to those.
The reason that I say that is just because I remember, and this is just sort of like a demonstration of how passionate about the project that you were and about that idea as well. I remember I think, funnily enough, it was the Resident Evil 1.5 episode, but we were recording a podcast, and then immediately afterwards you were like, can I drag you guys, since you're under NDA already, can I drag you into a call? And you were like excitedly explaining this, and we were all talking about the potential of it. I just remember that very vividly, this fantastic idea that you were like, well, how about this? How do you think people would react to this? Do you think people would be interested in the idea? It's a shame that it didn't happen, but it's just a very fond memory of you being like, I have a great idea.
When we were at Gen Con, and we had the dinner the night before, and Sherwin sat down next to me at dinner, and like, so he's waiting for me. He goes, "So, what do you think about an open world board game?" I think it sounds amazing. And then he could just like that was my fond memory about hearing about this for the first time as well. He's so excited to talk about it.
I'll make a point of dragging you all off for another random NDA call after this episode about this film.
Yeah. What I'm hearing, Sherwin, is that you put just a little bit of thought into how that whole thing could have gone down, and it's a real bummer we weren't able to do it.
It's fine. Like, as with anything, I've never worked on a single project where something hasn't worked for one reason or another, and I'm not going, okay, this is not the project for it. We can put it somewhere else.
All right.
Yeah. Awesome.
What I love about this Q&A is that we can sometimes answer questions before we get to them. In this particular case, what rule, scenario, board section, weapon, tension card, or any other thing did you really want to include in Resident Evil 3, the board game, but you had to cut it for some reason or other? Liam Thompson asks.
I think
the
bar
beginning
that.
of the end, Sherwin.
Yeah, I mean that. I mean, what else did we cut that I really would have liked? It would have been nice to have got what was the thing? Was it Sasprin lady?
The Aquacure girl, whatever it is. Yeah.
Aquacure girl. There you go. That would have been quite fun to put in.
I was really trying hard to make that the next Moth campaign.
I had a conversation with Capcom on the last day of the Kickstarter about whether we could add that during the pledge manager, and the answer was no. I really pushed for that for you.
I appreciate that.
Which scenario are you most proud of design-wise?
I'm going to go with the same one that Si mentioned earlier. I love the RPD2 Siege.
Yeah.
That's just so much fun. I think that one. I mean, I know Fraser's got his ones. Fraser certainly built some of the ones. I love the scenario he built, which was the it's Hospital 3, where you're destroying the tiles as you run away from them. That's also a lot of fun. So that's cool. I like the hospital ones. I quite enjoyed as a rule of thumb. They were generally very interesting to put together and so on. I think my least favorite one, purely because it's not, which isn't necessarily the question, but my least favorite is City Park 3. That was a headache to try and make just kind of feel quite characterful to the park, and I'm not sure we quite hit that one right. It's not to say it's a bad scenario. It just feels like it's lacking a touch of character compared to all of the others. But there we are.
The one thing, well, one of the best things about RPD2, by the way, is just the fact that it has one particular tension deck card that's only in that scenario, which is genius and evil, as the best things sometimes are both. Where it's something like, if you draw the card, you basically roll the dice for every A item on the board or something like that. It's ransacked, and you basically just have to clear off a certain number of items to imply that all the supplies have been taken by the cops that were fighting off the zombie horde in there, which I think is, yeah, as you said, sort of like in terms of characterful stuff, that was right up there for me. It just made me go, wow, this feels really like this event. So Resident Evil 2, the board game, balances differently depending on the number of players you got. You can play with any number of characters. Obviously, ideally 2 or 4 is the best way, potentially. When you're designing a scenario and everything that goes into that, sort of like the map size, the tension deck, what's on the encounter table, do you create it with 2 players in mind or 4 players in mind first?
3. Always 3.
Interesting.
3 is my safe spot for designing stuff, because that gives you a nice middle ground that you can then look at and go, okay, so so this scenario did this. If we had 4th character, how many extra tension cards would we lose? If we had 2nd character, how many extra zombies would we not be able to deal with? And then you balance it around that.
That makes sense.
That's it's worth pointing out, that's my take, which is very much design elements. So when you get into playtesting, I imagine Fraser would give you a very different answer. Because obviously at that point there's more involved testing at different numbers and so on. But from my early design point, 3.
Interesting.
So, regular Discord member Greenman, also known as Phil, asks, with the game now in the hands of most backers, there's been plenty of feedback. Is there anything you'd like to change about Resident Evil 3, the board game, if you were to do it again? Besides the obvious of like a dozen Barry miniatures.
There always needs to be more Barry. Always needs to be more Barry. I think Barry needs to be more powerful in the game, not broken enough.
And when he's not around, all the other characters should be asking, "Where's Barry?"
Yeah, right, exactly. I think my favourite part about Barry is that in all of the this is definitely going off subject. I will come back to the question. Don't worry. My favourite Barry part is that with all of the other rescue cards, it's you see a silhouette, you run over to help them, or you kind of get a radio call. It's Dario saying, "Please come save me." Barry saves you. Yep. He kills all the zombies on your tile and then turns up and is kind of very much what the hell, and that sort of stuff. Welcome to Barryville. No, I think I mean, there's a few things. Like the biggest thing that is a headache is, honestly, I always kick myself for anything that's like a typo or anything else, right? Because you're always going to have something that you miss. So that's the biggest thing. If I have a regret about RE, it's RE3, and it's not necessarily the terrain pack, which kind of confused things a bit into it. The one that haunts me and annoys me is the 3rd floor clock tower tile, which I desperately love to be a 2. Well, it should be 2x2, and it's such an easy thing that got missed, and it's a super easy fix. It's not anything that requires you to do anything other than choose a 2x2 instead, because it's literally a tile on its own. But it just bugs me. So I think that's the biggest thing.
Sherwin, question from Ferdinand van der Haak. Hi Sherwin, I'm really enjoying Resident Evil 3, the board game. I think I liked my first playthrough better than my first RE2, the board game playthrough, and that game was a blast. Can't wait for the next installment. In RE2, the board game, there was a nice Easter egg, In the retro pack, the 50th card was a secret photo of Rebecca that Albert Wesker had in his desk. Are there any Easter eggs in the RE3 board game that people haven't noticed yet?
Yeah, you should look at the artwork on the tiles.
And you
There's
can
a few
see that.
different pieces dotted in there.
Absolutely.
People necessarily haven't talked about, haven't looked at. Yeah, I think that's probably the biggest thing. Otherwise, people are generally very eagle-eyed these days, and have spoiled bits and pieces. And unfortunately, we don't have anything quite as much fun as, obviously, the new recruit card. But yeah, it's RE3 doesn't lend itself to that too much, because we obviously, we broke terrible English. We broke away from kind of a few different bits of canon and so on. But yeah, that's probably the biggest thing I'll say.
2 words: Burger Kong.
Yeah.
So when I asked everyone for questions, generally speaking, obviously we were looking at sort of design questions and history questions and stuff like that, how the game came to be and how it came to be made. But there was one gameplay question that came up a few times that a few people have been asking. So I thought I would include it for fun. I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly. Andrei Kapushin asked, how do flame rounds work?
So flame rounds, there's an errata coming that clarifies those guys. But basically, a flame rounds, the fire icon, which is sadly missing, after you make a flame round attack, if you hit the enemy, after you've done that, you put the fire token in their square.
Right. So a lot of people assumed it was that, so they assumed correctly.
Yeah, and just to be super clear, that fire token remains for the rest of the scenario. Do not shoot enemies indoors. Very, 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 very key thing you should not be doing. If you're in a corridor, don't use a flame round. It's bad. Unless you're across the fire, in which case you just, that's like a bath bomb to you, so you really don't care.
He grabbed his greener bath salts.
Exactly.
Oh, grim. So, our next question from Brendan Morrissey. During playtesting, were there any amusing / game-breaking exploits or issues that creative players discovered?
Very, very early on, and this is actually an RE2 one, which was quite entertaining. Which I don't think I've ever said to anybody. One of our guys, Ed, was very fond of opening item boxes and using typewriters through walls, because you have to do an adjacent tile, but we didn't specify through a wall or need line of sight to see to it. So as a result, he would I'm just going to use that typewriter from the opposite side. There's no reason why I couldn't use it from there. I'm just going to do it to bug you, and just doesn't necessarily work. So that was a thing. I think that's the biggest one. There's a really interesting one actually, which people get tripped up by, and it kind of became the way the rule worked, but. Jill's reposition ability originally was supposed to trigger off of her making evade rolls, not making attacks. The reason it is the way it is because it's quite complicated when you get attacked to resolve, versus making an attack is more straightforward. And it also gives her an interesting tactical switch where she can just run towards an enemy, pow it a couple of times with the gun, and then dodge past, which is quite useful. But the reason it is that way is because our original playtesters, our internal QA playtesters, misread the way the rule works and played it that way, and it's one of those light bulb moments where we looked at it and went, you've accidentally created a speedrunner way of playing this, which is kind of cool. So perhaps we should leave it this way.
I think it makes more sense as well, because obviously when I think of that move, it's the dodge that you've got in the game, which is actually done by the right trigger, right? So the attack button. Yeah. So it made complete sense to me. I do have one quick one from doing the playtesting that I remember. Was that the rules for fire hadn't been quite specified yet. So we had encounters where we were spawning fire and there was no spawn points. So we basically had to choose. Well, the spawn points were occupied either by an enemy already. So at that point, you didn't roll for fire either. If you just stepped into it, you took damage. Same with enemies. So you would just drop fire on a zombie and instantly kill it. Or alternatively, you would have to drop it in your own square. And that was something that had to be changed. I remember that.
Fire was one. Fire was one where I remember there was a. I think it was. I can't remember what scenario I played, but I remember playing it post Kickstarter and going, "Fire is just too powerful. Like, it needs to go down." And there was one thing that needed to be fixed with a sort of patch post Kickstarter. That was it.
I haven't looked at Advanced Mikhail's card, so this may have a bit. But did he end up with the grenade drop ability where he hurts everything in the tile with him?
Yeah, he does.
Nice.
I actually that wasn't originally powerful enough, and then I apologize to Fraser. He probably has noticed it by now. He went with a very sober, very sensible, and very measured thing of, it does like 5 damage to everything. I'm like, no, make it 10. Like, literally just messaged like the graphic designer was like on the 11th hour, went, make that number 10. Don't tell anyone, just make it 10. So it's super, super powerful. Yeah. And at that point, because most things are going to get killed by 5 damage anyway, right? So just put a really crazy bonkers number down for the fun of it.
I was the one I remember seeing and was like, man, that's so strong.
I'm 255 damage.
With the following question, this is from me. Painting through the models has been an absolute delight. Is actually mini painting something that you think about during the design process?
I don't think about it whatsoever, but the sculpting team 100% does.
Awesome.
So the sculpting team, one of the things that Matt, so my boss Matt Hart, he's an absolutely astonishing miniatures painter. If anyone wants to see an example of how sickeningly good he can paint a model in no time at all, go check out any one of the different videos he's done of like painting a Thunderjaw or whatever else. In space of an hour, I've seen this guy paint models that would win competitions. It makes me sad. But sorry.
So I'm gonna gush about Sherwin's boss for a second. He taught I watched him stream with he was painting a God Tier mini on using contrast paints. Completely changed my entire thought about them. Matt's a fantastic painter. Yeah.
So one of the things that all of our miniatures, whether they be Resident Evil, God Tier, old Guild Ball models, even Horizon to a lesser extent, because we use the actual models that Guerrilla have in game for that. But all of our models are always designed and built with painters in mind. Like, how are you going to get to that particular part of the model? Like if there's like a small, I don't know, like a small pouch, like don't put it so impossibly tucked into their fold of their clothing that it's going to be a pain to get to. Make clean areas where you can paint and like the dynamicism of the model moves around or whatever. Like it doesn't break the dynamicism of the model and doesn't make it bulky in the wrong places. Like keep the fluidity of the model's movement. Like make them so they've got strong, bold, purposeful kind of things. How does that break out? And also look at them in terms of what's going to capture the paint right. What's going to give the painter the most fun. Layering this on or make it really work. It's one of the biggest focus our sculpting team has. Russ and Matt are definitely the people who spearhead that. So yeah. But from a design perspective, obviously, I get a little bit of input on that. I mean, anything that comes even vaguely into the office related to Resident Evil, they kind of just shuffle onto my desk and go like, "Sherwin, can you tell us if this is good or not?" And it's like, yes, I can do this.
Yeah, I want to do a quick shout out in that general direction to whoever's idea it was to make one of the Barry miniatures inspired by his Revelations 2 look, because of course RE3 Barry.
Fantastic.
Yeah, RE3 Barry, you see sort of the back of his neck, and that's about it. So it's not really much to build a miniature of. And we've got 2 Barry miniatures, one for advanced and one for regular Barry. As great as Star's Uniform Barry is, it's nice to have the variation. I have to say, I haven't painted everything yet. But out of everything, I think that Revelations 2 Star Barry was one of the most fun ones the most enjoyable ones I had, just because it was nice to freshen things up, to paint something from a different game as well, and just be like, oh, it's cool. Look at it sitting in there with all the rest of them, all the RE3 stuff, and it fits right in. It was really cool. Just a unique way to go with it.
Yeah, that was one of the most challenging models to have to work out how to make Barry look. We were faced with. We can go round and round and round in circles trying to make something which we just have to guess at. And what we really wanted to avoid was this looks like the Stars uniform, but just because ultimately it's a Stars uniform, but he's got a yellow jacket instead. Like you can't represent that very well. So yeah, that was a good compromise that Capcom really liked. So it's all good.
Cool. So our final question actually comes from multiple people. Hayden Cartwright and also Lee Smith both asked in slightly different words, but nonetheless the same question. When you designed Resident Evil 3, the board game, how much influence did you take from Resident Evil 3 Remake, if any, versus the original game? And would you have liked to have included more stuff from the remake?
I hadn't actually played Resident Evil 3 Remake until 3 months after I finished work on RE3 board game. I didn't want to go anywhere near it.
That makes sense.
Because my sole focus was to make sure that it was based on the Resident Evil 3 that I knew and loved. And thought I'd experienced the remake in its own way after that. If there is one thing I could have put in it from RE3, I would put in something about birds and being on trains.
Right, I got you. Took me a second.
He says not swearing. I'd put in stuff like that. I will say, my absolute favorite, it's no surprise to anybody who's listening, as I've said this before. Nikolai is absolutely, I'm a Barry guy all the way, but Nikolai is a very close second. I love me some Nikolai, and he is astonishingly fun in that game. So I wish I could have perhaps put in a couple of lines from there. Like I'd love to have a "He's not after me" line, but there we are.
Yeah, that's fair. Well, that wraps up the question portion. Thank you to everyone for sending in their questions, and thank you for Sherwin for taking your time to answer those. Since we got you here and we got the community engaged, is there any final words or thoughts for the Resident Evil board game community?
I will quickly say there is one question I saw in the comment, which is about the doors, whether they're coming to retail or not. I don't know the answer to that question. That is something that I know our commercial directors had a look at a few times, because those things, yeah, you can say what you want about Steamforged, and people occasionally do, but we have the best doors in the business. That's a weird one, I know, but everyone loves our doors. I've never seen a single complaint about those things, and they turn up in all sorts of games. So there might well be one that comes to retail, but I couldn't tell you for yes or no for sure.
I am so excited for your birdsong terrain. You don't even know.
Yeah, I mean that's gonna be something else.
More plastic crack for me, thank you.
Yeah, I think sadly, yeah, just on that, the Birdsong Express, that game has just got bigger and bigger and bigger in a very scary way. I mean, obviously, you guys are all good if you backed it because it's not gone up in price. Your postman will hate you for trying to deliver it because it's a big box. This is going to have the biggest box of any board game I've ever seen to try and fit everything in. But anyway, this is a Resident Evil podcast. Were there any other questions?
I think that's it. So unless you've got anything else you want to tease or any final thoughts for the community?
No, final thoughts certainly. I just want to say thank you. You guys are amazing. I started making. I remember very, very, very clearly Matt telling me that I would get to work on Resident Evil, and I remember being a massive fan of the series and wasting God knows how many hours playing RE2 and RE3. I obviously RE1 as well, but I really threw myself to RE2 and RE3, and I have a lot of very fond memories of playing those games. And I remember really, really, really losing myself in those. And then when I got the opportunity to make a video game, make a board game of the video game, it was just a complete head, mind blown kind of moment. And getting to work on Resident Evil games has been the most fun. It really has. Like, it's been the most fun I've ever had doing anything ever, with zero exceptions. And there's a whole bunch of stories I could bore you with about kind of meeting some really amazing people who've kind of talked about how much they love the game, or kind of some really strange things, like the director of one of my most favorite things I've ever had from RE2 was the director from the original RE2 video game has a copy of my board game, and tweeted it, and it's like, mind blown on that sort of stuff. And I think stuff like that is, I mean, I will comically say I'm not sure he knows exactly what it is, but he's got it. But the point is, it's like, look at it going, this is weird, but no, it's stuff like that is cool. But honestly, the most amazing thing, without a shade of a doubt, is the community. Like, I had no idea that such an amazing community would come out of us making this game. I mean, I knew people were passionate about things. I knew people really kind of applied themselves to RE, but I had no idea so many people would come to really know and love the RE tabletop series as much as they do, and be such nice, cool people. I must admit, I didn't know it was possible to have such a healthy and non-toxic tabletop community as what exists for RE. And it is without a doubt, and I don't say this because I'm gushing, I say this because it's simply true, it is without a doubt the best board game community I have ever been a part of and ever seen. And I am continually blown away and humbled like you would not believe by just how amazingly awesome every single one of the people out there who play our games are. Like, such amazingly nice people, so welcoming, and they invest so much in themselves in the games. It's, you guys are the heroes.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, and obviously bit of a bias as someone that runs that Facebook group, but I can compare it to so many other groups that are either, as Sherwin sort of rightly said, toxic or just quiet, whereas our group is very engaged. I've seen people, and obviously been part of people, making friends groups that have continued beyond their love of this board game. I know people that are close friends now because of the board game community, and obviously part of one of those friendships and situations and stuff like that as well. So, and on top of that, just the stuff that people make and the homebrew stuff that people are doing, the remake design cards come to mind, and someone, building their entire RPD to scale to fit the miniatures in and stuff like that. We haven't had too many issues with people, We've been around several years now. We've only really had to kick a few people that were just basically there to troll and stuff like that. So yes, I echo that 100%. It's a wonderful community, and everyone who's interested in the Resident Evil board games should join it. Link in the description.
I mean, it's like anyone has a query. There's no like, oh, you're stupid, you don't know this. And then it's just like, no, so you need to do this, this, and this, or you've got Sherwin in the comments going,
this is correct.
If it turns out, just do this, and then,
he'll just like the correct one sometimes. No, I wanna go ahead and advocate that it's not just that community, but like it spawned multiple communities, because like First Aid Spray spawned because of that, and I would say it's kind of an independent community, because I know not everybody who's in chat right now is here because they're big fans of the board game.
Right, totally. As I said at the beginning, we would not exist without the board game community, really, and it kind of was the springboard for us to sort of head in this direction and cover everything. And of course, it's been nice to sort of give back and sort of do stuff with the board game, with Steamforged, and Burger specifically doing Itchy Painty now. It feels like kind of coming full circle, having a show where we paint the Resident Evil 3 board game miniatures on Twitch. So yeah, it's kind of nice.
It would be amazing if we can, for the obviously First Aid guys out there, or FazPod, whatever our appropriate abbreviation is these days. It'd be amazing if, when I can't commit to this, but if there happens to be a demo for another Kickstarter coming up, it'd be amazing if a few of us can get together and have some like stream playthrough, or not necessarily stream playthrough, but playthroughs where we can all chat and stuff while we're playing it. That'd be really cool.
Here's hoping, right? Here's hoping. Well, thank you, Sherwin. Thank you again, everyone, for sending in questions. Nothing else remains for me but to thank our contributors. If you'd like to be part of the show, then please look into auditioning for our file readings. Join the Discord server to get in touch with members of the team and our community, discuss Resident Evil with us and other fans, and listen to the podcast live as it's being recorded. You can find a link to the server, as well as our Twitter, Facebook, Twitch, Instagram, YouTube, and more at faspraypod.com. You can find the podcast on YouTube, Stitcher, Spotify, and iTunes. And if you enjoyed the show, please do leave us a review where you can. It helps spread the word. You can also support the show by picking up some merch or at patreon.com/FASprayPod for as little as $1 a month. In our next episode, it's our first day, but that's okay because we'll work it out and we'll be a government agent before too long. Yes, indeed, we return to the Profile series to take a long look at every appearance of one Leon Scott Kennedy. Thank you to the panel. You can follow all the Pueblo people individually. I'm at Syniac_123. Steve is at FB Steve Was Taken. Sherwin is at Sherwin's Agenda. And Michael is at It's Burger Time. And finally, thank you for listening and have a good week. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
I'm literally just typing that. Yeah, thank you, everyone. You guys set off my imposter syndrome like you wouldn't believe. Like, it's literally, I can just hear a siren in my head. It's like the place is about to explode or something.
Oh, it's Kill Bill. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I'm thinking more like Countdown to Explosion. Yeah.
Richard Whiteley's ghost appears behind Sherwin. Boo.
I wasn't aware that he's dead, but okay, fair enough.
Spoilers for real life.
Spoilers for Richard Whiteley.
I'm gonna ask who Richard Whiteley is.
Yeah, sorry, we got the British TV chat.
Throwing it out there, don't bother to Google it. It won't be very exciting.
Yeah, it's not all that great.
But does Discord have a GIF?